So let's talk a little bit about common snare drum placing. Now, snare drum on the kit is generally the only drum that we mic the top and the bottom part of. And the reason we do that is a snare drum has these snares on the bottom that makes up part of what the sound of the drum is. Later on, we'll be talking a little bit about why we close mic everything, and part of the reason that we put a bottom snare on a snare drum is because it needs to be close mic'd along with it. This is a pretty common setup we have right now of a top and a bottom snare drum using the Shure SM57s. I'll give you a little tip. When you walk up to a drum kit without even having heard the drum kit, what you want to look for is where the stick hits are on the actual head itself. If they're new heads, obviously you're not going to be able to see that, but if they're a little bit older heads and you can kind of see where that particular drummer is hitting in that snare drum, generally that's a really great starting point. Now, let's talk about the fact that we have two microphones. We want to kind of mechanically align those microphones to be in the same space. So if you'll notice at the top by the rim here is about, it's about an inch into the rim. And if you look on the bottom, it is also about an inch into the rim. You want to have both microphones kind of facing the same direction. That's a really great, just standard kind of starting point. EJ is here so we have listening examples of moving some of this stuff around. So EJ, why don't you go ahead and give us a couple of examples of smacking the snare drum and also whatever else you think is appropriate. Cool. So those were three examples. He kind of did a normal kind of snare drum hit, and then you saw he did a rim shot and then some paradiddle snare drum stuff. The one thing that I kind of want to get across to here is moving microphones very small distances makes a huge difference. If we move this top microphone in further to the center of the drum, you will notice that there's going to be a lot more low end in the sound. The problem with doing that is you run the problem of perhaps the drummer smacking that microphone as he's just playing. He's not paying attention to where the microphones are. So if I were to move this into the center here, it's probably gonna be a better sound. And of course, I'm gonna move the bottom microphone in a little bit so that they're kind of matched. It's probably gonna be a better snare sound. It's probably gonna have lots more low end and be pretty beefy. We'll give you a listening example of that. But as you can see, that's pretty intrusive into that snare drum, and the drummer is probably gonna whack it. So somewhere in between where I gave you the first one and this one is where we're gonna end up with the placement. But I wanted to give you an example of just what it does when you move the microphone in towards the center. So same examples, EJ, please. Pretty standard miking for a snare drum, but what I also want to point out that is very different from just your standard studio setup is in live sound, we have an additional component that we need to worry about, and that is a wedge or a drum fill that is next to the drummer and his drum kit. It's usually pretty loud, and what you don't want to have happen is have the microphone be pointed at that speaker. So something like moving these microphones around to this point, maybe even a little further, there we go, is not a great idea because as you can see, the capsule is now pointed almost at the speaker itself, and you're gonna run into feedback problems and also comb filtering and phasing because of what's coming out of this speaker. Don't point your microphones at the speaker, point them away from the speaker, and find some happy medium between the center of the snare drum and the outside of the rim. I'd like to do one more example just so you can see an extreme example of also what not to do, which is take this miking configuration and place it way off the snare drum and take this and kind of do that same kind of thing. Let's have a listening example of that. This is gonna be super thin. It's not an optimum miking place to be. I just wanna show you an example of that so you understand we've only done 3 to 4 inches of movement from the outside of the rim to the inside. It will make a huge difference in the listening example. So let's listen to that, EJ. super straight ahead examples of how to mic a snare drum and just showing you that the movement of a microphone by only, very little bit can change the whole world.